All right. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the Late Show. We are here once again to talk about one of my favorite topics of all time, some of the greatest watches, some of the most interesting watches, some of the most influential watches to have come out of Eric Clapton's collection. Once again, we have a show that has been encouraged and sponsored by I Love Maldives, to whom I'm always grateful for giving me this opportunity, first and foremost. I wanted to remind you of the first part of this coverage, which focused on that epic 2003 Christie's auction, which featured about 2 dozen of watches from Eric Clapton's collection, 25 in total, 23 stunning vintage Rolex pieces, and two iconic Patek chronographs that were sold there and later were on the market again and again, usually selling for more and more, of course. And in that first episode, we didn't only follow the fate and trajectory of these 2 dozen watches, but also thought about how influential they were in terms of the tastes of the collectors, or at least how prodigious Eric Clapton's collection was already at the turn of the last century, basically, already around 2003, to have included so many pieces that have become mainstays in vintage Rolex collections and Patek collections over time. The famous prototype Daytona Yachtmaster, this couple of Daytonas 62, 63, and 62 39, one being a Paul Newman exotic dial, and the one on the right being the mythical creature that is also called Crazy Dog, because it has an additional pulsometer scale on the periphery of the dial, graduated for 15 pulsations, like a doctor's watch, like a proper doctor's chronograph as well. These two watches, of course, at the time were sold for, you might say, a paltry sum. Okay, yeah. Sorry, someone who very generously reached out to me was saying that they have a lot of intimate knowledge about Eric Clapton's collection as well, and they can be at hand. And I'm grateful for that. And honestly, they should feel more than welcome to even join. All right. That being said, I don't want to spend too much time covering what we have already covered in the first part, which was, as you remember, very much Rolex heavy. And I don't think that's unjustified, since Eric Clapton is one of the most important celebrity collectors of vintage Rolex pieces, and his collection included so many iconic pieces, including some of these fantastic pre-Daytona chronographs, which are finally, slowly but surely, coming into public recognition and the collector's consciousness. And of course, some solid pieces that more properly belong to the tool watch category, like these three pieces with timing bezels, the turnograph right in the middle, the Submariner 5513 with the Explorer dial, with the so-called 369 dial on the left, the turnograph 6202, and then the Submariner with red writing 1680 on the right. I want to use a watch that we talked about last time and that I included in our discussion, even though it didn't belong to that famous Christie's New York 2003 auction. And that was the famous 2499, of which only two examples exist. One of which being actually allocated to Eric Clapton, the other one going practically straight to the Patek Philippe Museum in Geneva. This was basically Philipp Stern's idea to encase the last remaining couple of 2499 movements in platinum, ostensibly to keep one for himself and to directly exhibit the other one in the museum. But Eric Clapton, right then and there, in 1987, was able to actually secure one of these watches, and that watch ended up being sold in November of 2012 at Christie's Geneva for an absolutely mouth-watering, earth-shattering price of 3,443,000 Swiss francs. And I wanted to highlight this because it is a watch that already in 1987 earmarks, already in 1987 underlines the special relationship that Eric Clapton had with the brand, the connections he had with the brand. Philipp Stern is, of course, he was the president of the company at the time, the father of Thierry Stern, who is the president of the company now. And of course, the Stern family has owned Patek Philippe since the 30s and have put their stamp on the history of the brand to such an extent that the two names now seem to be inextricable, even though, of course, Sterns have a long-standing reputation as one of the most exquisite dial makers in the Swiss horological industry. It was that kind of special relationship that allowed Eric Clapton over the years to order a number of personalized pieces from Patek Philippe, pieces that were designed by him and people who were advising him, including, of course, fellow collectors. And some of those pieces also came up on auction over the years. And they have, in fact, done much to set the stage for a certain style to come, a style that was so influential that Patek Philippe felt right to adopt it, for example, when it released a number of 3970s after the fact to celebrate its 175th anniversary in 2015 in London with a grand exhibition at the Saatchi Gallery. Now, we started in 2003 in the last episode. Let's fast forward a little bit to 2016. And let's take a look at a number of pieces that were auctioned by Philips and that came out of Eric Clapton's collection. This is the Philips Hong Kong watch auction number 3 from November 29th, 2016. And you're looking at lot 1009. This is a Patek Philippe perpetual calendar, chronograph, 3970, still continues to be a very popular choice among collectors for a number of reasons. Some, of course, might still aspire to a 2499, just like the very special example that we have seen from Clapton's collection that eventually sold for an enormous sum. And they might not be able to afford a 2499, so 3970, preserving those classical lines is already a very attractive option. The other reason, of course, that makes the 3970 so popular for a certain kind of collector is because of its compact proportions. That might be because the collector has more conservative taste. That might be because the collector is more impressed perhaps by the feats of miniaturization, which of course is a very important aspect of horological complications, the ability to fit both a perpetual calendar and a chronograph into a 36 millimeter case is, of course, more impressive than doing it with a 40 millimeter or even a larger case. So that can be also a reason as to why someone might prefer the 3970 over and above the newer iterations like the 5970 or the 5270, which are, of course, great watches, but there are still so many ways in which 3970 might be even greater, might be even more preferable. And of course, the last reason might be, and this is very practical, and this is something that I identify with as well, is that they are easier to wear for those of us who have smaller wrists, or some people say very kindly, who have vintage wrists. So the 39XX family of Patek Philippe perpetual calendars and perpetual calendar chronographs, or as we will see, the 5004 perpetual calendar split-second chronographs end up being much more wearable for collectors with smaller wrists. Now, one of the things I want to highlight about Eric Clapton's particular taste when it comes to these personalized watches is actually their minimalism in an important way. Just because he had the opportunity, just because he had the chance to customize these watches, personalize these watches, order them with certain features, he didn't go all out. He didn't let it all hang out and chose something that was bordering on the absurd. All he did over and across these pieces that I will show you, the trilogy of 3970s and the special 5004 5004 P, is that he chose to affix a single Breguet numeral at 12 o'clock, complementing it with polished matching gold beads for the rest of the hour markers, and have a tachymeter consistently across the series, and overall come up with some interesting combinations between the dial finish and case material. And you are perhaps looking at one of the most influential ones. Nowadays, I keep saying, as you guys know, since brands come out with novelties every other month these days, and they all seem to be hell-bent on adding a salmon dial, a copper dial, or as is the case with this level of Pateks, an actual pink gold dial to be finished a certain way in combination with usually white metal. And this might not necessarily be the patient zero of that affliction. This might not necessarily be the ground zero of this particular trend, but certainly this 3970G was incredibly influential in this particular trend going viral. Eric Clapton's perpetual calendar chronograph 3970G with the salmon dial was incredibly important in helping this trend go viral. This is once again 2016, lot 1009, a piece that, of course, also beats with the classic Lemania CH27 based movement, sold at the time for 3,560,000 Hong Kong dollars, which was even then in excess of $500,000. I don't know if I can actually do it with 2016 rates, more or less, but I think it has been relatively stable. So that would have been, roughly speaking, in excess of 450,000 US dollars, perhaps a little more. And this particular piece actually, at the time, really underlining its trendsetting ability, sold for more than the more complicated 5004, which surprised a lot of people, but ultimately it made sense. As you can see, here is the Patek Philippe perpetual calendar split seconds chronograph from the same auction, just separated by 2 lots, which essentially is a more complicated version of the same style of the watch, of the same watch. The predictable result would have been that this piece would have sold for more than the 3970, to which it is a superior watch, technically speaking, horologically speaking, and they are pretty much contemporaries and executed largely in the same style. Again, Eric Clapton didn't necessarily broke any particular rules here, didn't do any faux pas, and simply ennobled the dial with a tachymeter on the perimeter and the single Breguet numeral at 12 o'clock, leaving everything else pretty much intact, combining a pink gold case with a black dial. And thank you guys for being here, and thank you for your comments. As I'm trying to pay attention to the presentation for the most part, I might not be able to respond to your comments and questions in an immediate fashion. So if you want to highlight anything, please feel free to send them in as super chats. That can always help me. Otherwise, I will try to get to them in due time. So from the same auction, the 3970G with the salmon dial with the now very popular combination of a salmon / pink gold dial and white metal case, namely white gold in 36 millimeters of diameter right here, sold for 3,560,000, whereas the 5004 R, the Patek Philippe split seconds chronograph perpetual calendar from Eric Clapton's collection, in the same auction, for sold for a little bit less, even though it had the higher pre-auction estimates, namely for 3,140,000 in Hong Kong dollars. Which amounts to over $400,000 still. Hey guys, Basil's, Captain Kirk, and Sam. So at the time, it was really surprising that an ostensibly quote unquote inferior watch would sell for more than a technically superior watch. But that particular combination of white metal and pink dial was so powerful that it became quite influential in its own right, to the point that Patek really borrowed a page out of that design language, as it were, out of that design aesthetic. Of course, it's not the same watch by any means, but I don't think it was a coincidence that Patek came out with a 5270p that looked something like this. And of course, you have much more real estate on the dial, which may help installing a few more indicators in the shape of these portholes in the lower half of the dial, a leap year indicator at 4:30, a day-night indicator at 7:30, and of course, a whole set of Arabic numerals in the upper half of the dial. It's hard not to see the lasting influence of that combination, which seems to have stood the test of the time, and in fact is gaining more recently more and more traction. I mean, imagine all the various salmon and copper toned dial watches that some of the legacy brands and more minor brands have released in the last few years, without even counting the other shades of pink and the more recent Barbie pink trend. Just wanted to bring that up as an example. And of course, those two were not the only watches sold at the Hong Kong watch auction. 3 by Philips in the November of 2016. there was this particular beauty completing that trio, lot number 1010, 1010, a 3970R. Once again, exemplifying the same outlines of Eric Clapton's taste in personalizing this particular series of watches by, again, adorning the 12 o'clock with a single Breguet numeral and using the real estates on the periphery of the dial for a classic, if also sporty, tachymeter scale. Hey, Neo, nice to see you as well. Hawkeye, I agree. I agree. Say no to drugs, kids. We don't want to encourage that kind of thing here. And again, if you are joining us kind of after the facts, maybe you are catching my show for the first time ever. The glasses are not a shtick. My right eye has been messed up for the last week or so. It is getting a lot better. I will be able to take it off probably in a few days already, by next week, I hope. So enjoy it while it lasts. And please don't be turned off by it. It's not a shtick. It's not a gimmick. It's not something that is here to stay. So I beg for your understanding, and I mean no disrespect by it. I just wanted to emphasize that. This time, the pink gold case is matched with an opaline white dial. Everything else remaining the same. I still want to pay some attention to it because this is a classic design for a Patek perpetual calendar. You have a register at 3 o'clock, which combines a 30-minute totalizer with a leap year indicator. At 9 o'clock, you have the combination of continuous running seconds, which encircles a 24-hour hand, which by definition, of course, acts as a day-night indicator. You have the pointer dates at 6 o'clock, within which the moon phase indicator is ensconced, and between the Breguet numeral at 12 o'clock and the signature of the brand, you have two discrete apertures for the day of the week and the month. I think 3970 overall is already, as I mentioned, a very popular watch for all the reasons that I enumerated. Its classic proportions, its relatively attractive price point, its wearability, especially for a smaller wrist, and of course, the fact that it actually operates with, that it is actually built on the classic chronograph base of Lemania CH27. Of course, that caliber still formed the base of 5970 as well, but you had already a bigger watch then. The other aspect of um, Eric Clapton's 3970s that I want to emphasize is precisely this. Um, Here you can look at a more, let's say, run of the mill 3970. Of course, this is the 3970 EP. So it is top of the line. It is platinum. But as you can see, this style simply has the obus-shaped indices in combination with baton hands. And of course, a finely graduated seconds track, which allows you to measure down to 1/5 of a second on the periphery of the dial. A very classic look, to be sure. Very clean and absolutely beautiful. Don't take me wrong. But there is something about Clapton's personalization that keeps the major elements of that classic design, that preserves the vintage/neo-vintage appeal of the watch, even as it gives it a slightly sportier, slightly elegant perspective, and still in a very, very masculine way. I really love how the tachymeter gives an entirely different air to this watch in the way it encircles that classic dial, which is further enhanced by the addition of the Breguet numeral there at 12 o'clock, and the feuille hands, the leaf-styled hands, I think go better with this particular configuration than the baton hands may have. This was lot 1010 in that Hong Kong watch auction number 3 by Philips back in November of 2016. This particular piece, right out of Eric Clapton's collection at the time, sold for 2 million even in Hong Kong dollars. And that, of course, amounts to more than $250,000 in the US currency. Hey, Sam Davidson, thank you for £2 sterling. I hope you are well as well. It's nice to see you always. Hawkeye, I can do an episode on that later, but absolutely, yes. There are photographs of certificates of origin with Eric Clapton's name on it. There are many photographs of Eric Clapton taken wearing at least some of these watches. I can do an episode that takes that particular angle where we can pore over some of the documents and do some watch spotting together. Let me see, though, at least when it comes to at least when it comes to some of the watches that I just showed, I think I might actually have ready to go some pictures of the documents even. Let me see. Yeah, we are dipping into watches by SJX's content here. This is an article written by him, JX Su, back in 2016, with personal photographs that he took of these three watches that I talked about. The pink gold with the opaline white dial, 3970R. The white gold with the pink gold salmon dial, 3970G. And the 5004R with the black dial on the right. The provenance, believe me, Hawkeye, is unquestionable. It's not something cooked up by any means. It's something that has been proven in more ways than one. Let me see again. It's in the Hodinkee coverage that you have, for example, a picture here. This is the 3970G that we were talking about. As you can see, this is the certificate of origin that belongs to that particular watch. And it is sold to one Monsieur Eric Clapton from Chelsea, Londres. Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't have I shouldn't have done that. Yes, it is actually a watch sold to one Monsieur Eric Clapton from Chelsea, London. Again, the three watches together. And in each case, sometimes more, sometimes less. But there's always more documentation. And as you can see, this is a piece that he bought back when from the Geneva Salon. Now, funny enough, we have just looked at lot 1010, the opaline white pink gold 3970 that sold. That piece was back on the market not long after, in about a year, once again in November, this time going to Geneva with Philips. And just to make sure of that, it's not a coincidence, the one that sells in Hong Kong in November 2016 has the movement number 3,049,041. And the one that sells in Geneva in November 2017 has the same movement number, 3,049,041. Of course, it is presented as having been formerly in the collection of Sir Eric Clapton. here, the auction listing actually integrates the certificate of origin, which is addressed to Monsieur Eric Clapton, Chelsea, London, England. And as you can see, it is, of course, a full set that includes the additional case back. Would you prefer to have that extra heft on your wrist? And of course, a matching setting pin as well to allow for a more civilized way of setting your watch rather than using a toothpick, as I do sometimes when I tinker around with my Universal Genève tri-compacts from the 40s. This 3970R with the opaline white dial, with the classic Eric Clapton personalization details, was sold for $366,500 just a year after it came on the auction circuit for the first time, having been sold in Hong Kong for a little more than $250,000. So you see that almost instantly it started being appreciating in price. Of course, as it happens, earlier in 2016, back in Hong Kong, in only the second watch auction that Philips organized in Hong Kong, they had already sold a piece that fits along the aesthetic outlines of the Patek Philippe perpetual calendar chronographs and the perpetual calendar split-second chronograph that we were looking at, namely this 5004 in platinum that you are looking at. This is lot number 169 from Philips Hong Kong watch auction number 2 from May 2016. And the combination of a platinum case, which is already quite rare, with this deep blue dial, with all the Clapton details, namely the Breguet numeral at 12 o'clock, in combination with matching polished gold beads, the feuille hands, and the tachometer on the periphery of the dial. It was a winning combination along with the platinum case. And this absolute stunner of a piece sold for $6,280,000 in Hong Kong dollars, which amounts to a hammer price in excess of 800,000 in US dollars. And this, of course, should not surprise. Again, you are talking about a watch that is potentially unique, that has a blue dial, that combines that with already one of the most rarefied and absolute grail watches in the neo vintage category, namely 5004 in platinum. And again, I should also add, by the way, that those elements have become so popular, even beyond Patek, that my cheapo Merci instrument Calatrava has a dial that harkens back to another three-tone silver dial from the Art Deco Bauhaus era, but replaces a certain element of the dial with a single Breguet numeral at 12 o'clock. So this particular piece was sold back in the May of 2016, on May 31st, 2016, for 6,280,000 in Hong Kong dollars, which is in excess of 800,000 in American. Now, of course, these were not the only Patek Philippe chronographs that Eric Clapton owned. In fact, he did go for pieces that were perhaps even more contemporary, that were bigger and more butch and quite stunning indeed. I think the 5970 held for Eric Clapton perhaps just as much charm. It was perhaps just as captivating. So we will have an interlude with the 5970, only to come back to some of these watches that were first sold in Hong Kong on a public auction in 2016, only to come back later in auction as well. But 5970 replaced the 3970, even though it kept the CH27 base. It modernized the case construction, the proportions of the case, and by some accounts, already when the model was introduced in 2004, Eric Clapton had ordered 4 distinct variations of the model with his signature elements, combining them with brick style bracelets at the time of the order. Now, to my knowledge, again, these brick style bracelets you could not order separately. I don't know what the more recent policy is and whether that policy applies universally. But the fact remains that to get these models with matching brick style bracelets, you had to basically order them or you have to basically configure it at the time of the order in this specific way. And Eric Clapton ordered not 1, not 2, but 4 of these watches. 2 of them are still, quote unquote, unaccounted for in the sense that they have not come out on public auction. I don't even know whether he held on to them, but you can see that he's wearing one of them in the thumbnail of the show today, actually in Monza, as it happens. And you can see there that he's wearing it on a leather strap. So these bracelets are actually detachable. They're not fixed, soldered, or integrated in some other way. This particular example is the 5970 Line 1G, which actually came on public auction and which we will take a look at. But I wanted to first go through it in these detailed pictures by SJX, since I wanted to focus on some of the details and once again note the provenance of the watch, which was delivered on July 4, 2006 by the Geneva Salon of Patek Philippe to one Eric Clapton from London, UK. And this particular piece already sold twice in a public auction. in 2018, at least twice, I should say, in 2018, it was lot 2917 in Sotheby's Hong Kong important watches auction. And it sold there for almost 5 million in Hong Kong dollars, namely 4,920,000 Hong Kong dollars, which amounts to in excess of 627,000 in US dollars. And if you pay attention to the dial design, you will quickly recognize that Eric Clapton seized on the additional real estate that opened up on the dial of the watch, with the case having grown from 36 millimeters to 40 millimeters. And in fact, this time went for a full Breguet numeral dial, with a dial that includes a full set of Breguet numerals, except, of course, at 3, 5, 6, 7, and 9 for pure logistical reasons. And once again, those Breguet numerals are combined with leaf-styled hands and a tachymeter imprinted on the periphery of the dial. This is once again a white gold piece that has a brick style matching bracelet, which was ordered with the matching brick style bracelet. So 5970 line 1G. And it is rumored to be only one of 4 such watches that were ordered by Eric Clapton at the time. Here is another one that also came up on public auction, but I wanted you guys to see it first on the matching bracelets. This is a 5970 line 1R. So the same model in pink gold with the matching brick style bracelet and the same dial configuration, namely the combination of a full set of Breguet numerals with leaf-shaped hands and the tachymeter on the periphery of the dial, which of course serves as a as a continuation of the theme that was already there in Eric Clapton's 3970s. Now, this watch actually came up on public auction even before its white gold sibling. And it was at Sotheby's Geneva in 2014 in the important watches auction, when it sold for 406,000 in Swiss francs. And even though the presentation here displays the watch on a leather band, the lot actually included the break style bracelet, which apparently had one of its pins missing, as the lot essay explains. So that may well have been the reason as to why the watch was exhibited, as to why the watch was shown on a leather band rather than the matching break style bracelet. Now, we had already said that in 2018, the white gold sibling of this watch sold for almost 5 million Hong Kong dollars, again by Sotheby's. And that was in excess of 627,000. It was lot number 2917 in the Sotheby's Hong Kong Important Watches auction in 2018. And it appeared again in a Sotheby's Hong Kong auction in 2021, along with a number of pieces from Eric Clapton's collection. And this time, the pieces, of course, didn't come directly from Eric Clapton's collection, but their provenance was strongly established. The Patek pieces in the 2021 Sotheby's Hong Kong Important Watches auction were apparently consigned by a famous collector from the Southern Hemisphere, as the sources have it. And there were also a number of pieces from Eric Clapton's Rolex collection in the same auction, which were consigned by yet another collector who had bought these watches from Eric Clapton himself. And for better or worse, we are not going to go back to those Rolex watches, since we chose to focus today on the Patek pieces. We can return to those at a later time, but this is the same 5970 line 1G, one of, again, ostensibly 4 pieces, 2 of which have so far sold on public auction, that Eric Clapton ordered more or less at the time when the model line was announced, seizing on the opportunity of utilizing that additional real estate that opened up on the dial to more fully realize his vision of creating the perfect Patek piece that combines the modernity of reference 5970 with loads of vintage inspiration and classic charm. As you can see, the bracelets are removable. but in their design, they create a relatively seamless, nearly integrated look that it is extremely striking to see them on the matching brick style bracelet. Of course, it is hard, once again, not to look at this watch and see perhaps a more market-driven version of it in the famous 5960A, right? Admittedly, it's a very different watch, right? Admittedly, it combines rather an annual calendar with a self-winding flyback chronograph. But if you zoom out of the dial just a little bit and think of the larger styling of the watch, it's hard not to see the influence of that relatively sporty, seemingly integrated look that is given by the calendar chronograph face and case in its integration to vintage styled bracelets. Coming back to Eric Clapton's 5970 Line 1G that sold again in 2021. This time it went for even more, nearly 7.5 million in Hong Kong dollars, 7,435,000 in Hong Kong dollars, which meant that from around 627, it went up to almost 950,000 in US dollars, almost $1 million. In that same auction, another classic from Eric Clapton's collection made a comeback, and that was his combination of the platinum case with the deep blue dial. This was lot 2208. From the Sotheby's Hong Kong Important Watches auction in 2021. The Patek Philippe Perpetual Calendar Split Seconds chronograph with a set of leaf-shaped hands, feuille style. The combination of a single Breguet numeral with polished beads for the rest of the hour markers and the classic tachymeter scale on the periphery of the dark blue dial. This piece came back on the market in 2021 as lot 2208 in the Important Watches auction of Sotheby's Hong Kong and sold for 7,677,000 in Hong Kong dollars. And that is, of course, slightly more than the 5970 line 1G that we just looked at. And it is in excess of 978,000 in US dollars. Again, almost getting to that level of becoming a seven-figure watch. But that was not all. Everyone's favorite, perhaps the all-time favorite piece came back. Once again, you can see how the certificate of origin presents Eric Clapton's name, no matter how subtle it is in terms of the photography here. That was also the case, I believe, right here. No, this time it was folded for the 5970 line 1G. But for 5004 in platinum, you could actually see, even in the auction listing, that the certificate of origin included the name. And it includes also yet another piece that was popular through the years and that we will recognize from the Philips Hong Kong auctions from the 2016 season, and that is the 3970G with the salmon dial in its combination with the white metal. As you can see here, it was in fact allocated to one Eric Clapton from London. And includes, of course, all those signature details that we now come to recognize as part and parcel of Eric Clapton's collection, part and parcel of his signature personalized Patek Philippe pieces. The tachymeter, the classic tachymeter on the periphery of the dial, the unique combination of the dial color and the case material, the set of feuille hands, and the single Breguet numeral that was combined with polished gold beads for the rest of the hour markers. Of course, with 3970, which is encased in a 36 millimeter diameter case. This was as elegant and practical a solution that the limited real estate on the dial allowed. You might say that for that reason, the 5970s with the matching brick bracelets that included a full set of Breguet numerals on the dial are perhaps a fuller representation of Eric Clapton's vision when it comes to a neo-vintage Patek Philippe piece. And here, once again, is the 5970R. '5970 line 1R, in fact, the perpetual calendar chronograph presented with its matching brick style bracelet. Once again, a very heady mixture of a lot of classical inspiration and vintage charm blended with a contemporary wearability and even a certain kind of sporty look that is given to the watch by this relatively integrated, almost seamless look in the combination of the brick style bracelet and the rather muscular case with its angular lugs. This particular piece in 2021, when it returned to the auction circuit as lots 2207 at Sotheby's Hong Kong Important Watches, sold for 6,104 Hong Kong dollars. That amounts to more than 778,000 in US dollars, which means that it nearly doubled in terms of its price point in the 5 years that passed from 2016 to 2021. And of course, things have gotten only more complicated and more intense, you might say, since 2021. Now, I also wanted to share with you a couple of things, a couple of elements which also shows you how such design elements, how such details were embraced by Patek Philippe in-house, as it were, right? So let's look at these two watches, right? We are going back to 2016. This is the 5004 in pink gold that sold in the full version of the Philips Hong Kong watch auction. Pink gold, black dial, perpetual calendar, split seconds chronograph, 5004 from 2009 with those signature customization, or you might say personalization details of Eric Clapton. And here is a watch that Patek made in extremely limited numbers to celebrate its own 175th anniversary with a grand exhibition in London at the Saatchi Gallery in 2015. This is a 3970 ER that was made for the London Watch Arts Grand Exhibition of 2015, which was a celebration of the 175th anniversary of the brand. And among many other releases, in addition to a lot of different novelties, Patek Philippe actually decided to encase some of its remaining Nouvelle Lemania CH27 based movements in combinations of unique dials that were never either never appeared, or that were never combined with that particular case material. And in this case, no pun intended, you are seeing how that dial layout, which combines the sole Breguet numeral at 12 o'clock with polished matching gold beads with leaf-styled hands, makes an appearance in the brand's own celebration of its 175th anniversary. Here is another great example, this time a 3970 EP. Same watch in platinum with the black dial. And as you can see, with the same signature details that combine the inscription of the tachymeter on the periphery of the dial, or on the perimeter of the dial, with a single Breguet numeral at 12 o'clock and the applied gold beads for the hour markers, which complete the picture in their combination with leaf-styled hands. Please hit the like button, by the way, if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. It really helps, especially for these kinds of broadcasts where we can appeal to a broader audience. So please help me boost this live stream by liking it, by commenting on it once we are done here, and also by sharing it with your friends, with fellow watch collectors, and others who have a passion perhaps for Eric Clapton and other related matters. Here is another example of a similar watch, but I want you to actually take a few more looks at this particular one. as you can see. Even though the watch is technically from 2015, of course, it still has the Nouvelle Lemania CH27 based movements, and therefore also still bears the hallmark of Geneva, since this is a piece that was built with the caliber CH27-70Q in extremely limited numbers for the 175th anniversary celebration of Patek Philippe, namely the Watch Art Exhibition of London. You might come across some of these pieces as Saatchi editions, named after the famous art gallery in which they were exhibited on that occasion, well, in which Patek had a watch art exhibition. Here is another example of this stunning perpetual calendar chronograph, which is also a testament to how well those personalized Eric Clapton 3970s, as well as the 5004s, how that set of 5 exquisite timepieces that included 3 perpetual calendar chronographs and 2 perpetual calendar split-second chronographs by Patek actually represent the classic taste of the brand, to the extent that the brand would choose practically the same style down to every single element to celebrate its own very significant anniversary. The tachymeter, the Breguet numeral, the applied bead markers, leaf-styled hands, and the unique combination of the dial color and case material. You can see there on the balance bridge, the hallmark of Geneva once again. Even though 2015, of course, stands on the hither side of that transition that Patek experienced right around 2009. Remember, we covered this auction earlier this year when they were opening for the first time these sealed Patek pieces with this rather choreographed recording where they receive a white glove treatment. You can see the spontaneity of the recording from the way that the gentleman actually struggled there for a second. This was a 3970 EP, a platinum perpetual calendar chronograph, Saatchi edition in those limited numbers for which these pieces were released to celebrate the 175th anniversary of the brand. Combining the new old stock Nouvelle Mania CH27 based movements in unique case and dial combinations. Very cool. So I wanted you to take note again of how important those particular pieces from Eric Clapton's collection were in terms of their representation of some of the best elements of neo-vintage and more contemporary Patek Philippe watches in terms of intertwining those elements of classical inspiration, such as leaf-styled hands and Breguet numerals, with more contemporary and sportier elements, including a tachymeter scale. And in the case of his later orders from the 5970 line, also brick style bracelets, which were combined with the more modern, more muscular and angular and larger case of the 5970, which in its extended real estate allowed Sir Clapton to actually indulge in a full set of Breguet styled Arabic numerals. Again, presumably there are 4 of such watches. Only 2 of them have actually come up on public auction. with this particular version in white gold, last selling in 2021 for 7,435,000 in Hong Kong dollars. And with the pink gold version, selling for more than 400,000 in Swiss francs back in 2014. This particular piece. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for being with me on this live stream. We have focused for this episode on the neo vintage and more contemporary Patek pieces that were once part of Eric Clapton's personal watch collection. Of course, our access to these exquisite pieces are largely when they come up on public auction. So that was inevitably our focus. Thankfully, that helped us to see some of the price trends and stylistic influences that these pieces generated over the years, that these pieces testified to over the years and decades. If you are more interested in the vintage Rolex pieces that formed part of Eric Clapton's collection, including some very important vintage Pateks, including a couple of important vintage Pateks, you can go back and enjoy the first episode, which I now pinned in the chats. And if you have a focus that leans more heavily on the neo vintage and more contemporary Patek Philippe pieces in his collection, you should feel free to rewind and watch this episode. Not only did we track how these pieces, the 3970s, the 5004s, and the 5970s from his collection, we have focused not only how these pieces performed in these auctions, but also thoughts about how they both informed and represented a certain distinguished and classical taste in Patek Philippe perpetual calendar chronographs. The combination of Breguet numerals and leaf-styled hands certainly had an influence that went even beyond the brand, that had an effect even beyond the sphere of Patek Philippe collectors. The combination of salmon or copper tone dials or pink gold dials in combination with white metal cases certainly have had repercussions that are still being felt and that are still unfolding in the horological space. And of course, the series, presumably the quartets of 5970s, the more modern, although already discontinued, perpetual calendar chronographs that Eric Clapton ordered, that were matched with their brick style bracelets, were really influential in their own regard in terms of combining what is a classic prestige complication with the wearability of a contemporary and even sporty watch. And that, of course, has been quite influential, both stylistically, but also even in terms of how Patek Philippe released a few different models as part of their serial production. And I think even with all the differences in terms of the dial configuration, and of course, in terms of the specific complications and their execution, you can most certainly see a family resemblance between Eric Clapton's 5970 on the brick style bracelets and of course that is a perpetual calendar chronograph and the 5960 line 1A, which was quite popular in its own rights. Introduced in 2014, combining what was once a proprietary Patek Philippe complication, the annual calendar, with the modern self-winding flyback chronograph, which is a movement, which is a caliber devised in-house by Patek Philippe as well. Thank you so much. Please hit the like button on the way out. I really appreciate your presence and support. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you for your comments. Sam Davidson, thank you for your generous contribution in the form of the super chat. And above all, thank you. I love Maldives. We all love Maldives for giving me the encouragement, supporting me, and sponsoring me for the series of live streams that focused on some of the most influential watches that have come out of Eric Clapton's collection and that were sold on public auction. Perhaps in an additional episode, I might focus, I might kind of go out on a watch spotting mission and compile perhaps some shots, some photographs of Eric Clapton wearing these watches. If I come up with enough material for a full stream, I will most certainly do it. Otherwise, feel free to share your recommendations Feel free to do that in the form of comments to this video. If you want to contribute, you know how. The links are in the video description. They are now in the chat as well. Please feel free to reach out to me via email, here in the comments. And of course, you can also find me on Instagram at young.brando. Take care, everybody. I will most certainly see you tomorrow, where we will cover the final nominations for GPHG, the Grand Prize for Horology, Grand Prix d'Horlogerie de Genève. We'll do that tomorrow. And then we are heading once again to Steel Buffalo Motors on Sunday for an early live stream, for some lively conversation, smoking cigars with friends. Write to me in the comments. I look forward to catching up with you then. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, wear and enjoy your watches. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.